You're listening to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the world's first English language internet radio program about business in Brazil, now in podcast format. I'm Tom Reaoch and your host for the show. I'm talking from the city of Campinas in the state of Sâo Paulo, Brazil, so when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Today's guest is Rafael Pinto, and he's talking to us today from Miami, Florida, on his way back to Rio. And Rafael and I connected on LinkedIn in 2014, and we follow each other in several groups. And I recently came across a post of his on LinkedIn regarding LatAm Startups. Rafael Pinto is founder and director of Occasio International Advisory Services in Rio de Janeiro, and he serves as a strategic advisor for the Young America's Business Trust, which promotes social and economic development of young people around the world through programs of leadership, training, technology, and alliances. He is also director at the LatAm Startups organization, which strengthens business opportunities, networking, and linkages between the innovation entrepreneurship and startup ecosystems in Latin America and Canada. LatAm Hub in Toronto is helping Latin America startups scale globally. So with that, Rafael, hello and welcome to Talk to Brazil.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks for the invitation, and it's exciting to be part of this program.
Now, what was interesting, and since being on LinkedIn, there's so much information that flows past us, but it was really interesting to see that video that you posted on the award ceremony for the LatAm Startups, and it was the NACO Awards. What were these awards, and what are the implications for LatAm Startups in Canada?
Sure, great. So I'm actually, like you mentioned before, a director for LatAm Startups, which is an NGO based in Toronto, Canadian NGO, led by a Colombian Canadian professional, Miriam Lazarte. And she invited me to be director a few years ago. And what the program focuses on is to help Latin American startups who are who are thinking of expanding globally, but have it based out of Toronto, Canada, which is a huge ecosystem. It's actually the second biggest corridor of technology and innovation after Silicon Valley in North America. Really? The Toronto Waterloo, yeah. So the LatAm Startups, it's also a member of the NACO. NACO is the National Community for Angels, Incubators, and Accelerators, which is the biggest group of angel investors groups in Canada. And we also have an MOU with the City of Toronto. So it's really providing the ecosystem space and networking for startups from Latin America who want to expand globally from Canada.
Well, Toronto is, I think, a natural city of diversity and an open-armed welcoming of everybody.
Absolutely, and during the event, and just to build on that, I apologize. Once a year we do a conference, and that's what you were referring to in the post that I put. Once a year we do a conference. It's been in Chile and Mexico City before, but now we do it in Toronto, where we bring together the ecosystem from Canada and Latin America together. We had about 350 people attend this year. The mayor of Toronto attended, gave some opening remarks, and he stressed on the same point you mentioned, how Toronto is the most multicultural city in the world. So it's also a very interesting market to test your market, your product and services with different cultures in the city already. So it's very interesting.
Let me take that point. You're Brazilian for our audience to know. Do Brazilians perceive Canada and Toronto as a target when you're talking about the startups?
In recently in the last few years, it has come to the attention of the Brazilians. Yes, they've always thought of the U.S. obviously, Europe through Portugal. It's still strong. Obviously, there's more barriers, I think, in the U.S. because of the immigration challenges, and also it's a little bit more saturated. It's a little bit more difficult to navigate the networking there. What Canada provides, and that's what we provide as a competitive advantage. We show them, and Canada themselves promote this. It's not only us. Canada is an entry point to the U.S. market or the global market,
Right.
because it is easier to let's say start up a business in Canada and even go through the immigration process. But you come to a city like Toronto, you can pilot, you can validate your product in a multicultural market like that. But opening a business in Canada, you're just about an hour away from Chicago, New York, Boston, and the Canadians know that. They know that people go there. The Canadians invite people to open their business in Canada, but go to the market below, right? The neighboring market to go sell more, because the market is bigger. So
that's a good point. It's easy to start a business in Canada.
Yes, it's easier. They have several ways of. There's a lot of government incentives right now.
Okay.
So a lot of and the government even gives a lot of grants. So as soon as you're established Canadian company, you can apply for a lot of grants. And that's what we also tell the startups to go up there.
Okay.
Before looking for investors, look for the free money, so to speak, which are the grants that the government can provide.
Well, obviously the money's not hanging from trees. There is a process of getting there. And is that what you do to help the Latin American startups formate themselves for that?
Absolutely. The LatAm Startups, along with the yearly conference we do, usually in May or June, we have a program called the Bootcamp and the Hub. So the Hub, it's twice a year, it's last 2 weeks of March and last 2 weeks of September, where we invite startups from Latin America who are interested already or in the stage already of expanding globally. So they go to the boot camp, which is a 2-week program where you kind of feel the ecosystem. You get introduced to see key players. You understand how the market is. After the 2 weeks, if you see that this market is interesting and there is an opening opportunities for your company there, they can apply for the hub, which is a 3-month process. And that's what we provide. One of our differentiators is that the LatAm startups, you don't need any certain visa to come in. You come in as a tourist, you stay 3 months, and you don't have to be a Canadian company. The next step is what we also provide are the contacts with several accelerators and several programs there, which they require you to be a Canadian company. So after 3 months of the hub, you get a feel of, okay, this is the right market, this is interesting. I'll establish myself as a Canadian, and then you apply for the other programs, which many of our startups have been part of already.
Okay. And then obviously they're through that process, have access through the ecosystems of investors, the angel investors, as you mentioned. So
Yes.
taking advantage of the ecosystem that's established.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned before, I mean, it's some like fintech, cybersecurity, life sciences. Some of these sectors are, Toronto is one of the biggest in the world. So there's a lot of opportunities for startups in the Toronto Waterloo corridor, it's called. Definitely.
And you mentioned Waterloo. Waterloo is what? Adjacent
Waterloo,
to the city?
yeah, it's about an hour. It's another city, an hour and a half away. It's where BlackBerry actually was developed as well.
Okay.
It's one of the biggest research and development hubs in the world, and so it's that corridor they call Waterloo, Toronto, which is the second biggest after Silicon Valley in North America. Toronto is the fourth biggest city in North America. Sorry, so people don't realize how big it is.
That's true.
And then there is investments. Fintech is the Sâo Paulo, let's say, of Canada. It's where the business is.
Okay.
So it's pretty. So the role of LatAm Startups is to help you as a facilitator. It introduces the ecosystem to you. If you go alone, it'll take longer. It's harder, more expensive. So we charge a fee. We don't take equity. We're an NGO, so we just charge a fee where you come and we set up an agenda. And trainings on certain marketing for their business model. One of our stats is 92% of the startups have gone through our program. 92% of them have changed their business model, because when you're coming from Brazil, you have a business model already set in Brazil and you want to expand globally. The idea of going up to the boot camp is to talk to people in the market and see, well, they'll tell you, okay, to expand you have to change a little bit this way or pivot a little bit. It won't work with the model used in Brazil. And just on that note about Brazil specifically, our program, over 50% of the applicants and over 50% who are chosen for the boot camps are from Brazil, which is really interesting. So there is a growing.
You're looking for all of Latin America, right?
Yes, we are, and we are looking. It's open to all Latin America. But on your question on Brazilian interest, from this specific program we're working on, it shows that there is a growing interest by startups in Brazil to go via Canada to expand globally. So we get more Brazilians. In March, we had 6 startups, and 3 of them were Brazilians in the program.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. Every year we have a lot of Brazilians going up there.
And what about the Young Americas Business Trust? Is that a similar type of organization? How does that work?
Right. So I've worked at the Young American Business Trust. We call it YBT abbreviation since I lived in Washington D.C. many years ago. I'm still connected to them. I've always been connected. I'm a consultant as well, and so we work with promoting entrepreneurship training and development in Latin America.
Okay.
So we have several programs where we do even online entrepreneurship training, and I'm heading over to Colombia next week for the finals of one of their projects, which is a training for entrepreneurs. It started online, and they're having their final pitches in Colombia, in Medellin next week. So it's a program that it's already 20 years old. We're celebrating 20 years actually right now. We're having a little celebration in Colombia.
Okay.
But so the idea is to connect through networking, through training, through alliances, through public-private partnerships, is to provide more opportunities for the entrepreneurs.
Well, let's talk about network. Let's take that word you just mentioned, and I'm a strong believer in that. Are Latins and the companies and the persons you've seen in Latin America, are they natural networkers? How do you see that fit when just talking about Toronto and the rest of the world? How do they approach the world?
Right. Well, it's a very good question. I like to say that the Latin Americans are very social, right? They're very social people, and even in social media, they're the biggest. Brazil is one of the biggest networks in LinkedIn and Facebook. Brazil networking, as you very well, you're one of the top networkers. It's a skill, it's practice, it's confidence, it's getting out of your comfort zone. I think the Latin Americans could be more social they are, but more target, more objective sometimes when
more process oriented in the network.
Oriented, exactly, in their networking. I think people in Latin America they're very, very nice and personable, but learning how to take that to the professional level could be improved. Yes.
Well, I've been here for many years, and the joke, we're from Rio, you know that. Where the people in Rio generally invite you over, but never tell you where they live, right?
They'll say I'll call you, but they'll never get the number. You don't know whose number is.
That's a little bit what I see here culturally, in the fact that this is my opinion again. Most Brazilians like to be introduced to another person, and it's not common that they would go up to a complete unknown and introduce themselves. Whereas you're talking about Toronto, United States, and other places in the world, people naturally go up to, if you're in an event, business event, people naturally go up to each other and introduce themselves. I don't see that as coming naturally in Brazil. What's your feeling on that?
No, it's a very good point. I lived abroad most of my life, and I came back to Brazil, and I see that one of the big differences as well is that it's the mindset, right? When I was in Toronto, and I lived in the U.S. as well, you can see that there's more of a collaborative incentive that people really want. They want to collaborate more. They see it's a win-win for everybody. And not that in Latin America people don't want to help each other, absolutely not. But I think the mindset of I see this a lot all around Latin America. They're less open to sharing ideas or talking about collaborating in a project or business. Perhaps a fear of others stealing your idea, or perhaps I think that's a big difference. And I noticed a lot in the ecosystem in Toronto, where everybody is there's a lot more open mind and collaborative, and that's how Silicon Valley grew itself, very collaborative, and we still are lacking that in Brazil and Latin America. Again, I'm generalizing because I know that people.
I highlighted those two words on the information that you sent me that I posted on our site, and this is what's written there. Rafael strongly believes that collaborating and complementing each other's skills in the workplace can add more value. And I agree with you.
Absolutely,
I see that here in the open and the adventures, the innovation centers that I've taken part in. Socially, the Brazilians are good, but collaborating and being open about the process and openly helping each other, that's a different step.
Absolutely, and it has to be win-win to everybody, and it has to be all the stakeholders collaborating with the same mindset. But I think there's room to improve, and I think it's a cultural mindset that we have to to continue
But
for
you
them
feel
for them
that's
to
the
change.
same throughout Latin America, then? It's not
Yeah,
specific to
I feel
Brazil.
it is. I feel it is, and yeah, it is. Some cities might be more open, but I get that feeling when I travel and I work throughout Latin America. Some countries are even more closed up than in Brazil, for example. But that's a process we have to change in the mindset of the people, and also government and also the private sector. Everybody has to be on the same wavelength for everybody to benefit.
Right. So that's your impression then, that and being out in the world, and your view of not only of Rafael out there, but the people that you deal with, they have the same impression when they look towards Latin America and Brazil specifically, that the Brazilians need to show themselves differently.
Right, I think they do, and also look more globally. The economy of Brazil is big, so a lot of companies tend to stay focused on the domestic market, which makes sense for some companies. But when we're talking about startups and innovation and technology, the world is the market. There you can scale up quicker when you have technology. I think there needs to be a little bit more getting out of your comfort zone, a little taking more initiative, and also programs that can help these companies expand. The LatAm Startups one is just one that I can mention, but there's so many that missions that take you to the U.S. or so there has to be more, and the government as well has a couple of programs that they try to incentivize startups to go out and visit other markets, but it's the proportion is very small compared to the country that we have, the size of the country. So there should be more of these, I believe.
No, and I agree with you, but I think that's back to those words, collaborating and complementing. You can only do that amongst others. So
Exactly.
so very good. So, well, back to what we were talking about, the importance of networking is fundamental, and that's for any company. And the networking within an ecosystem. Another point that I see as a difference that in the tech side, most people are spending probably most of their time developing whatever the service or the app that they're working on. Other persons that I've interviewed, and I've shared that with you, Russell Douglas is from Scotland. What he mentioned, he says persons developing in the startups, they need to consider their own marketing. Obviously, you have to develop your project and your program and your product, whatever it is, but you have to market at the same time.
Yeah, and actually, that's a really good point, and I see that challenge a lot in Brazil, where in the U.S. they say. The investors also say they always bet on the team and more than the product sometimes, because the product can fail, but if you have a good team. What I mean about team is you have these guys who are developers, and I meet a lot of these young entrepreneurs in Brazil who are really good in the programming and the technical side, but they have an awesome product, but they don't know how to sell it. They don't know how to market it. Right. So it's talk about complementing a team, finding the right skills. You find someone that's more business oriented to come into your startup to focus on the sales or the marketing piece, and that's where a lot of great ideas and great teams or great startups, they fail because they can't find a complementing team to fill all these roles. You can't expect a programmer who's very introvert and focus on his programming to go out and start pitching and selling, and that's one thing that it's about training. I think there's training programs in Brazil for startups. It's starting to pick up again. And then you have training and pitching. I mean, there's all kind of areas that you need to work on before the startup starts, expanding. And so you're right. I mean, it's
but out there in the real world, the pitch has to be in English.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the pitch has yeah, exactly. When I mentioned to you before as well, when we're talking about LatAm startups, we go through a filter, I'd say, a interview process for the startups who want to go to Canada, and one of the requirements is to speak at least a minimum of English, because you can't do networking. You can't go to the meetings in Canada if you don't have a decent amount of English. And plus, if you're thinking of expanding globally, if you don't speak English, hire someone that will be your face abroad, that will be pitching English abroad, because you cannot do business without English, at least in most places. Of course, if you're working in Latin America, it's Spanish and other places, but English is still the business language in most parts of the world, right?
And most of the angel investors are out there. When you're making your pitch, it's to somebody who has money. It's not just to the market.
No, absolutely, and the communication is important for them. The confidence, the relationship, and if you can't communicate with them well, if you can't express your idea or articulate your product, your service well, it's going to be hard for you to you'll lose the opportunity just on that based on the lack of communication, and not because your product wasn't good.
Well, here in Brazil, is that part of your advisory, part of what you do here to the Brazilian startups, to your relationship here in Rio and throughout Brazil?
Yes, we have a training program. We've launched this year with some partners on internationalization. So we help them understand what's the process, when's a good time to internationalize, and we also provide some content of how other markets where they could go to, where would be best to fit in for their product. And I've done training for pitches in English for several startups and companies in Rio and São Paulo. It's something that I'm constantly doing, just giving them a little bit of what the reality is of what I know abroad, how the people abroad think, or what they expect, and I try to incorporate that in the training that I do to the companies and the startups here in Brazil.
Well, when will you be back? You love to travel, so you're out quite a bit. When will you be back in Brazil?
I'll be back by the end of this month in June, and I usually go to São Paulo a lot for events or meetings. We're trying to close some deals for the internationalization course in the second semester. And we're actually focusing on the northeast of Brazil, which is actually very interesting in terms of the ecosystem. Yeah, in Sergipe, Paraíba, a lot of these areas in general have been forgotten or not put so much attention in. Usually most of the business is in the São Paulo, Rio's, the south area in Brazil. But it's interesting that a lot of these areas up north are investing a lot of money in innovation and technology. Right. And so there's a lot of accelerators we're getting in touch with and technology park, and they don't want to be left behind. They don't want to be left behind. So there's a lot of initiatives that are very interesting. Sebrae is a strong supporter as well. So we're looking to try and do some trainings there the second semester, because there are resources and there are people who need a lot more knowledge and experience, which is what we can provide, my partners and I.
Great. Well, let's do that. Well, next time you're in São Paulo, because in Campinas is just 100 kilometers away. We're like the Waterloo to Toronto, maybe. And, right?
Yeah, you're right.
No, seriously, that's part of the thing. People come to São Paulo and forget Campinas, and Campinas is the technological hub and the center.
Absolutely.
Had here is the Silicon Valley. So when you're in the neighborhood, I'd like to see you and introduce you to someone here as well.
That would be fantastic. I appreciate it. And the idea is to really connect the ecosystems together, have everybody learning from each other, collaborating, and even exchanging experiences. I mean, this is what Brazil has to do to benefit the country itself as a whole. So it can't be stuck in São Paulo or Rio the entire time. I really believe that.
Well, it's like you got to be stuck in an airplane going somewhere. I think that's that's what the world's about today, right?
Exactly. And and the world's about working online. I mean, what you're doing now, what you can do with anybody around the world. You can interview. I work a lot and with teams we're in different countries, and how it's done. People have to be flexible. The working style is changing, right?
Exactly. Today is exactly that. Last week you posted about your visit to Canada. I saw it. Emailed to you. We got in touch. You said you're stopping on Miami on your way over to Colombia, and we hooked up. This is the time we can talk. Bingo.
Exactly.
No, that's how it goes, and then be back to Rio and wherever. But it's everything is literally on the fly. But you have to be able to do that.
Absolutely. No, and there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to be done and can be done between people in different regions. I connected a lot of people in Toronto through LinkedIn, and I'm going to be following up with them online as well. Mm-hmm. And that's it's about speed as well. It's follow up, and that's another thing that's very different in Latin America and the U.S. and Canada, is that the people are more do more follow up and quicker pace in North America, so to speak. Right. That's another thing that it's about communication style. In Latin America, it's not so much. So it's a learning process for both ends. People want to do business in Brazil, have to understand the business culture, and people want to go abroad. You have to understand, the Brazilians have to understand how things work. And that's what we do in Latin America, LatAm Startups too. We tell them, you're Latin American, but you're in Canada. You have to think how the Canadians do business here. You can't do it how you do it back in Ecuador, Brazil, or Colombia.
Wherever. Right? And that's it. Well, Rafael, we're coming to the end of our program, and I want to let you go so you can continue your travels, right? But I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and speak to our audience today, all right?
No, thank you, Tom, and congratulations. I think these kind of initiatives is crucial. The exchanging of knowledge, of content, of people who work on the field. I think it's important for everybody to benefit from. So congratulations again.
Well, thank you, and we try, okay? And we do hope to see you here in Campinas in one of your stops.
I'll take up your offer on that. I definitely want to pass by.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And I'd also like to invite our audience to visit our website, talktobrazil.com, where you'll find today's interview with Rafael Pinto and links to his LinkedIn profile, as well as to Occasios.com. And that's OCCASIOIAS.com. And Rafael is Rafael, and the last name is Pinto. You can also find this and our previous shows of Talk to Brazil on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, TuneIn, Himalaya, and many others. And thank you, our audience, and remind everyone that today's program was brought to us by Focus MI Marketing Intelligence, and Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. And more about them on their site, which is focusmi.com. That's FOCUSMI.com. Send your suggestions or comments to me, that's Tom at talktobrazil.com, and join the Talk to Brazil group on LinkedIn and follow our discussions. So remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.